Good morning and welcome to Deaconess Foundation's public release of our Power Moves Assessment Results and Action Plan. I'm Cheryl Walker, President of the Board of Directors of the Deaconess Center for Child Wellbeing and alumni of the Board of Trustees of the Deaconess Foundation. On behalf of our governing boards, thank you so much for joining us as we share our learnings about how well we are building, sharing, and wielding power with our partners to advance child well-being. We're thrilled you have joined us and look forward to our time together this morning. Deaconess has been on a racial equity journey since the 2014 police killing of Michael Brown Jr. and the youth-led uprising which followed. Our growing appreciation and awareness of the ways anti-Black racism, white supremacy, institutional privilege, and their resulting social inequities inhibit the well-being of children in St. Louis and America has made it abundantly clear that we can only accomplish our vision of child well-being through racial equity. As a result, Deaconess's institutional focus has been on pursuing racial equity. Our understanding of it is informed by our partners in mission, our colleagues in philanthropy, and community of service. Over the last 6 years of our learning journey, it's included several things, including service in several settings of the Ferguson Commission process, staff and volunteer training in Association of Black Foundation Executives, Responsive Philanthropy in Black Communities, inviting accountability by publishing a management commitment to racial equity, detailing reallocation of resources in grant making and investments, and a racial equity task force, which has led to changes in our vision, governance, and operations. In January, Deaconess began to assess how well it leverages power for equity and justice using the National Committee for Responsible Philanthropy's Power Moves framework. Our most recent organizational reflections and learnings on power and equity brings us to this moment as we have completed NCRP's Power Moves assessment. Today, you are part of our community of accountability as we discuss the findings of our organizational assessment and the course corrections that Deaconess needs to make to strengthen our resolve for the racial equity and racial justice that is necessary to be sure that children and youth in our community are thriving. It is with this background that I would like to introduce Reverend Dr. Starsky Wilson, the President and CEO of the Deaconess Foundation and an extraordinary visionary and leader. Starsky?
Good morning, Cheryl. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. Thank you to all of our partners, panelists who are here, to all of you who are joining us virtually. I'm Starsky Wilson, President and CEO of Deaconess Foundation. I have the remarkable gift of serving with the region's children here in St. Louis with a dedicated board, an absolutely remarkable staff, and change-making partners throughout the St. Louis metropolitan region. We gather here virtually and recognize our reach has extended far beyond the physical capacity of our conventional community conversations, which we gather in order to align actors along with our public policy approach and agenda. So welcome those who are near and far to our community, to our partners in the philanthropic sector, and those who are moving and building power here in the St. Louis region. As a bit of introduction, Deaconess Foundation is a grant-making institution that is related to the United Church of Christ. Our purpose is building power for child well-being through philanthropy, advocacy, and organizing for racial equity and public policy change. As a ministry, Deaconess has invested nearly $90 million to improve the health of the St. Louis metropolitan community since its inception in 1998. The foundation's advocacy and grant-making footprint includes 1 city and 4 counties in Missouri, as well as 3 counties in Illinois. Our friendly commitments and community action tank, Deaconess Center for Child Wellbeing, support grassroots organizing and advocacy in the St. Louis metropolitan region. Our mission-related investments increase access to capital for community development financial institutions that serve children and families in our community. And we are clear that racial equity and public policy change are the most sustainable ways and approaches to advance child well-being in the St. Louis metropolitan region. We also know that neither of these two is possible without power. So we have sought to assess just how powerfully we are, just how well we are engaging to build, wield, and deploy power on behalf of children in our community, and how we do this with our partners in the region. We owe our partners and volunteer leaders a special debt of gratitude for transparency, for being open, for being honest, for being candid with us throughout this process. And this helps us to improve our practices, our policies, and our public witness. So thank you for your participation in and investment in our improvement. Today, our journey will include hearing from one of our national partners, Lisa Rangeli, the Senior Director for Evaluation and Learning at the National Committee for Responsive Philanthropy and co-author of the Power Moves assessment tool, who will provide a brief overview of Power Moves. In the interest of full disclosure, I should note we are very close partners. I chair the board also for the National Committee for Responsive Philanthropy. And you'll also hear from Caroline Battles, a Deaconess Foundation trustee and chair of the Racial Equity and Culture Task Force here, who also serves as a vice president for Ascension, overseeing their community engagement and advocacy work. She will briefly describe the governing board's engagement in the assessment process and our action planning going forward. Our friend and partner, Makia Moody, who is senior manager at Lapiana Consulting, will present the assessment findings. Deaconess engaged Lapiana, a third-party firm, to conduct the Power Moves assessment. Then we invite you to join us in a community discussion where you are encouraged to ask questions about the assessment itself, the process, and the assessment findings. Keisha Davis, our Director of Partnership and Capacity Building, who oversees all of our grant making and our support work for our funded partners, will moderate the discussion. Following the discussion, Rudolph Nickens Jr., we call him Rudy, our chair of Deaconess's Board of Trustees, will share Deaconess next steps on these recommendations that our partners have made to us so that we might be accountable to these assessment results. We make a note, the assessment results and report will be available at Deaconess website, deaconess.org. At the conclusion of this gathering, we'll also make it available in the chat. And we invite you to join us even in making sure we make these conversations better by participating in an evaluation that will be dropped in the chat as well. At this time, we welcome our partner and friend, our guide on this journey, and the guide for many of us in the sector on evaluation, Lisa Rangeli of the National Committee for Responsive Philanthropy. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Wilson. Hopefully folks can see and hear me okay. So I just want to say how much I appreciate the opportunity to join this event, which is actually a first for Power Moves. We've been in existence for 2 years, and this is the first time that a funder has not just used our tool, but actually opened up to a very broad audience the opportunity to hear about their experience, what they've learned, and what action steps they'll take as a result. So we really appreciate this modeling of transparency and openness, and also this peer learning opportunity for other grant makers. So I'm just going to briefly describe NCRP's vision, why we exist, and then a little bit about Power Moves to provide context, and then turn it back over to the Deaconess folks. So NCRP has been around for about 45 years, and our mission has been constant throughout, which is to ensure that philanthropy contributes in meaningful ways to creating a fairer, more just, democratic, and equitable society. Our unofficial tagline is that we've been biting the hand that feeds us for 45 years, because we do receive funding from grant makers, and we also try to be a critical friend and truth teller. In practice, what does that look like? Well, we have a 10-year strategic framework that guides our work. And what we want to see over time is that funders are diversifying their boards and senior leadership for those that are the vast majority, which are still primarily white-led organizations, that they are giving more to social and racial justice and for the benefit explicitly of under-resourced communities, those that are experiencing inequities. That funders are giving more flexible funding, more multi-year support, and more core general operating support. And that they're also using that other 95% of their assets to invest for equity. And finally, that as a result of better funder practices and more resources going to communities, that nonprofits that are working for social and racial justice will increase their impact and win, and we'll have a more equitable society. So the origin story of Power Moves goes back to 2009, when NCRP put out a set of aspirational benchmarks for philanthropy that align with what I just described to you in the previous slide in terms of the practices we wanted to see funders embrace. And many funders said to us, well, that's well and good, but what does that look like in practice? And so we did a bunch of research demonstrating what that looked like in practice. And then we developed a project called Phil Amplify, where we wanted to show funders how they could really dig deep into understanding what they're doing well and what they could do better. So we assessed about a dozen major foundations over 3 years. They did a lot of great work in trying to respond to our recommendations. We surveyed and interviewed their grant partners and their peers as part of that process. So the results were really grounded in very meaningful data. But after 3 years and 12 major assessments, we realized that we weren't going to be able to go to scale unless funders started to take responsibility of doing their own assessments. And so we decided to create a self-assessment guide. And as we were developing that guide, we were thinking about where the sector is in its equity journey, kind of writ large. And we were pleased to see that racial equity was becoming a greater topic in the sector. Many more sector organizations were talking about it, but that an essential piece that was missing was this piece around power. So a lot of foundations were saying, yes, we support racial equity. We want to be helping to achieve racial equity, but they weren't looking at the systems that are responsible for that. So we created Power Moves. So let's define equity, because that way we're all on the same page. So in the NCRP Power Moves guide, which does have an extensive glossary, we say that equity is achieved when you can no longer predict an advantage or disadvantage based on race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, or ability. So we think about equity as an intersectional concept. So we center race for historical reasons and for present day reasons. It's baked into structural racism is baked into the founding of this country. And we acknowledge that, of course, there are many other forms of disparity and oppression that need to be considered alongside race. So what does an equitable framework look like for a foundation? It's one that looks at structural differences and opportunities. So it acknowledges that racism is systemic, and therefore the solutions need to target systems. And that also prioritizes targeted solutions for those communities that are experiencing inequities. So the concept of targeted universalism is that if you target benefit to those who are most disadvantaged or oppressed, not only will you help those communities to change those inequities and end them, but also everybody will benefit. So we have a very short definition for power. We draw from Rashad Robinson at Color of Change, which is power is the ability to change the rules. So why are we talking about power? I mentioned that a little bit earlier, but the next slide will tell you more. So whether through organized people or organized money, power is the force that changes systems. And philanthropy is most definitely organized money. It may also be organized people. Every foundation that wields power by virtue of its position relative to grant seekers needs to acknowledge that. And so whether they wield it mindfully or not, they are wielding power, and they need to be clear about that and hopefully do it in a mindful ways. And then, as I mentioned earlier, in order to truly strive for and advance equity, foundations need to understand power in society and also their own power in relation to communities. So now I'm just going to give a very brief overview of Power Moves so that everything else you hear will make context, will make sense. So what's inside Power Moves? Power Moves is actually a guide that looks at 3 dimensions of power, and I'll briefly describe what those are. It provides tools to collect data and information from the Foundation's board and staff, also from grant partners and the community and other stakeholders. It provides discussion guides and opportunities to reflect with humility on the results of all of this feedback and data collection, and then action steps that can be taken to find ways to transform programs and operations for lasting impact by creating and implementing action plans. And you'll hear about how Deaconess has gone through that process. We talk about 3 different facets of power. The first one is building power. So building power is about the Foundation's grant making, and that's about supporting communities to engage in systemic change by funding community organizing, advocacy, and civic engagement. Sharing power is about the Foundation's relationships with its stakeholders. So that's about nurturing transparent, trusting relationships and actually getting to the point of not just getting input and feedback, but hopefully actually co-creating strategies with stakeholders. And finally, wielding power is about the Foundation's bully pulpit. So making sure that the Foundation is exercising public leadership beyond grant making to create equitable and catalytic change. So together, we believe that if a foundation is really looking at how effectively it's building power, sharing power, and wielding power, it has a greater likelihood of advancing equity and justice. So to wrap up, I'm just going to give some examples of practices that we want funders to aspire to with each of these 3 dimensions of power. And this is all rooted in the many assessments and studies we did of other foundations, and also the thousands of grant partners that we surveyed and got feedback from about what they think best practice is. So funders who build power for equity are explicit in their goals, strategies, and operations about the fact that they are seeking systemic equity. Many foundations are not explicit that equity, and particularly racial equity, is actually a goal. And it may not be in their grant guidelines and in other places where that's an important place to signal what they're trying to accomplish. And also that they name specific communities that they are seeking to benefit. Because if you're not naming specific communities that you're seeking to benefit, then there's no accountability to make sure that your strategies actually are benefiting those communities. Of course, funding those communities to build power and be their own agents of change. Recognizing that building power may not fit narrowly into defined issue areas, and so they can fund cross-cutting approaches. And we've heard from so many nonprofits that they don't fall neatly into one program area or one issue focus, and so they get shunted to the side. And then fund for the long term while remaining responsive to emerging and urgent opportunities. So that's building power. Sharing power, the best practices that we learned from our extensive research was that funders who share power effectively are highly responsive, inclusive, and transparent in their communications, not just with existing and prospective grant partners, but with other key stakeholders. They are providing that multi-year core funding, which is a big sign of trust, right? That you're not going to need to micromanage the grant with project-specific funding. Building trust through attendance. That means showing up in the community, showing up in the spaces where your partners are. Don't expect them to always come to you. And then sharing your funding connections. That's actually something that many funders don't do, and they have vast networks. So sharing those networks and that social capital is really important. And then finally, when you engage with and solicit input and hopefully eventually co-create strategies, that you go beyond the usual folks. It's very easy to kind of get complacent and be, connecting with the same folks over and over again. And then finally, wielding power. So there's a number of facets to wielding power. One is to convene your grant partners, convene other stakeholders around a shared purpose. but also can participate in other convening tables, go to where the community and others are already meeting. So learn when to be a good leader and when to be a good follower. Also organize and collaborate with your philanthropic peers to try to coordinate, get better strategy, have greater impact across a group. And then also other sectors such as government and the business sector and the worker sector. Use your reputation and expertise to bring visibility to critical issues and amplify the voices of the most marginalized. So don't just speak for community, but speak with community and help their messages reach broader audiences. And then finally, I talked earlier about mission investing, deploy those other assets aside from the amount that's going out for grants every year and creatively shift resources and power to communities that have been underinvested for many years. So that's what those three look like. And when we launched Power Moves, we asked funders, are you ready? Are you ready to ask yourself hard questions, to receive tough answers, to examine your own power and privilege, to get honest feedback, and make strategic changes? And the Deaconess Foundation right away said, yes, we are ready. And so it's been wonderful. I have to thank Matt Oldani, who was early part of that journey, and then Keisha, and now bringing it full circle with this event and with Reverend Dr. Wilson, being able to say, yes, we made that commitment and we followed through. And so thank you very much for this opportunity. And if you want to download Power Moves, that's where you can find the guide on our website. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Lisa. We'll turn it over to Caroline Battles now.
Thanks, Lisa, for the overview and your partnership. Good morning, all. On behalf of the Deaconess Foundation Board of Trustees and the Racial Equity and Culture Task Force, we welcome you to this presentation of our Power Moves Assessment Results and Action Plan. For the past 3 years, the task force has supported the evolution of the Foundation's lived commitment to incorporating racial equity within everything we do. Through the policies that guide our inclusive approach when selecting vendors, the grants that are made, the ways we offer support to partners through the Deaconess Center for Child Wellbeing, to deeply listening to community members and refining our advocacy agenda to activate change for children in St. Louis. The Power Moves process was launched to explore and access across our network, to learn where partners and community stakeholders perceive Deaconess Foundation in building, sharing, and wielding power in support of the movement to catalyze action that will positively impact outcomes for our children. We were eager to learn more about partner perceptions of our work and how Deaconess Foundation can further improve in support of the work of child advocates across the region. Along the way, both the board and the task force were engaged with the process of the assessment. From affirming our desired outcomes during our annual retreat in January, to regular updates as each step of data collection was completed. And finally, coalescing around the recommendations and action plan framework derived from the assessment. We have come to this occasion not only to share the results of the process, but to look to each of you to hold Deaconess accountable as we move this action plan forward. Our goal is to operationalize the recommendations that emerge from this process to further guide us toward living our vision for power building on behalf of St. Louis's children. Thank you for joining us on this journey. We appreciate your continued support. And now I'll turn it over to Makia Moody, Senior Partner with La Piana Consulting.
Good morning. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share the assessment findings for Deaconess Foundation. This process would not have been possible without the partnership of my colleagues, Q Kang and Beverly Snow. Q was instrumental in every facet of our engagement and our data analysis related to the Power Moves assessment. And so I'm excited that this information is now going to be out in the public domain. So as an entry point to the video that you're about to see, revealing the assessment findings for Deaconess Foundation, I wanted to offer a bit of context or framing. In Decolonizing Wealth, Indigenous Wisdom to Heal Divides and Restore Balance, Edgar Villanueva writes about design choices. and how many of our design choices are steeped in colonial white supremacist organizational practices that seem inevitable. And so what's possible when we think about not subscribing to the colonizers' principles of separation, competition, or exploitation, but rather how would organizations and communities be different if they were based on principles like integration, interdependence, reciprocity, and relationship? I think this question about design choices and how to be in relationship with others was really the salient point and focus for this work with Deaconess Foundation. And so with that, you will be able to see this video that offers up a recap of the assessments from this process. Rashad Robinson, a change maker at Color of Change, says that power is the ability to change the rules. The Power Moves assessment is Deaconess Foundation's attempt to think about how it's going to change the rules that govern philanthropy and how it makes grants available to its community partners.
Guided by Deaconess Foundation staff, we conducted interviews and deployed surveys to ask key stakeholders a selection of questions from the National Committee for Responsive Philanthropy's Power Moves assessment. Respondents were asked to rate and reflect on their perceptions of how Deaconess Foundation builds, shares, and wields power in its work within the community. Participants included staff, board members, funded partners, not funded partners, community-based initiatives, peer funders, and program partners. We asked survey respondents to rate their level of agreement with a series of statements about how Deaconess Foundation builds, shares, and wields power. Similarly, we asked interviewees to reflect on their understanding and experience of how Deaconess's policies and practices, again, build, share, and wield power in the community with partners and with beneficiaries. We also reviewed a selection of background and process materials as part of the assessment in order to understand how the Foundation's beliefs and values around power are institutionalized and put into practice. So in our first section, we're looking at building power. Building power is about supporting systemic change by funding civic engagement, advocacy, and community organizing among marginalized communities. Respondents agreed that Deaconess Foundation is deeply committed to building power in many ways. Staff and board members are aware of their role and influence in the community and actively look for opportunities to break typical power dynamics in order to ensure their funded partners and community members know that they are equal players at the table. Their internal policies and procedures reflect intentionality in their push to recruit and hire for racial equity, not just for staff, but in the types of vendors they recommend and hire, and the organizations and leaders they invest in. Deaconess strives for collaboration in its decision-making to ensure it is not acting in a vacuum and has centered equity and social justice work in its theory of change and grant-making. The greatest gap identified by stakeholders was the extent to which Deaconess Foundation's grant programs and funded activities are accessible to and seek to benefit differently abled people. While participants noted Deaconess is committed to equity and does make its physical spaces and events accessible, there is an opportunity to build up stronger supports and systems to ensure the Foundation is including differently abled people in its program design and delivery. One resource from the field that may help Deaconess in its journey to building power is the Race Matters Institute's organizational best-in-class indicators for racial equity. These are organizational indicators which can be incorporated into the Foundation's data collection systems and processes and ensure that Deaconess continues to emphasize racial equity in its internal measures of progress and success.
In the second dimension, sharing power, which focuses on nurturing transparent, trusting relationships and co-creating strategies with stakeholders, respondents agreed that Deaconess Foundation shares power with funded partners, community members, and other stakeholders. Foundation staff and leadership are very intentional about using their positions and influence to help amplify the voices of partners and community members. It works with funded partners to ensure they have access to resources and assistance they need beyond grants, and is conscious of working with stakeholders in order to define success. The Foundation is interested in receiving feedback about their performance and wants to ensure partners and community members can shape the kinds of programs and activities that Deaconess supports. One example of this are the convenings that are hosted by the foundation to really solicit and garner input and insight from community members on important topics. The greatest gap identified through the assessment was Deaconess Foundation's willingness to invest in innovative or unproven ideas or organizations. Many lifted up the foundation's support of emerging leaders in the field, but there was some disagreement about the foundation's investment in innovation or unproven entities. This is one opportunity for Deaconess to think critically about what kinds of innovation it might foster, or what unproven ideas and organizations might need in order to support people and partners who may be overlooked by traditional philanthropic grant making. One example from the field related to unproven or innovative bets in the social sector is the Weisberg Foundation, which envisions a world that recognizes inequities and actively seeks to dismantle structural racism by continuously building access, opportunity, and power so that all can thrive. After the Weisberg Foundation conducted their Power Moves assessment, the foundation committed to reparative grant making to prioritize POC-led organizations and partly participatory decision-making by engaging reviewers from the community in the proposal review process. This is one activity that Deaconess Foundation may consider in the future. Another example in the dimension of sharing power comes from the Field Foundation of Illinois, where there is an investment of $50,000 with no strings attached to Chicago leaders to help promote and advance a range of leaders whose influence will inform decision-making across the city of Chicago. $25,000 of that award goes directly to the individual, and if eligible, the other $25,000 goes directly to their organization. Deaconess Foundation effectively wields its power to lift up its stakeholders and community members, invest in people and organizations, and advances racial equity and social justice. Many participants spoke to the foundation's strong community voice and presence and how it speaks up to advocate for important causes and systemic change. The foundation was integral in the Raise the Wage campaign and also hosts child advocacy days annually. As a collaborator, there's an opportunity for Deaconess to work more closely with its partners to facilitate connections and address cross-cutting issues and concerns. In addition, while the foundation conducts and publishes important research, there is sometimes a lack of awareness about this work. One example from the field related to wielding power that may benefit the Deaconess Foundation as it prepares to operationalize the results of the Power Moves assessment is the Funders Network, a philanthropic serving organization that leverages its blog to amplify voices from its network. In the area of wielding power, one opportunity for the Deaconess Foundation is to identify ways to collaborate with others to address cross-cutting issues. So if you think about the intersections of health and the environment or justice and education, there's a lot of opportunity there. One resource from the field that might support Deaconess Foundation in this work is the Advocacy Capacity Tool from Boulder Advocacy, which includes a discussion guide and other ideas for how to convene groups in order to shape an advocacy agenda.
Based on these findings, we developed a series of recommendations for Deaconess to build upon and strengthen the work it is currently doing. To that end, the foundation has developed an action plan to hold itself accountable for building, sharing, and wielding power more intentionally. In the coming weeks, leadership will work to further flesh out how Deaconess will be responsive to the results and recommendations shared today.
Good morning. Thanks to Makia and Q for that review of the assessment findings. It's been a pleasure engaging both of you in this process over the past few months. We now invite you to join a community conversation where you're encouraged to ask in-depth questions about the assessment, the process, and the assessment findings. I am joined by familiar faces to this morning's presentation: Ms. Caroline Battles, Chair of Deaconess Foundation's Racial Equity and Culture Task Force, Ms. Makia Moody with La Piana Consulting, Ms. Lisa Raganelli, National Committee for Responsible Philanthropy, and the Reverend Dr. Starsky Wilson, President and CEO of the Deaconess Foundation. Please note, while the chat function is disabled from the attendees to the panelists, the Q&A function is open for you to ask any questions that you may have. And I note that we already have a few questions queued up in our function. So with that, let's start with our first question. The question comes from Julia Howell. If there is a continuum, where would you place diversity, equity, and inclusion work alongside Power Moves? Would you say that Power Moves is mostly about the external work while DEI is internal? I'll turn it over to Lisa, who can maybe give some context as it relates to the emerging movement around diversity, equity, inclusion across all sectors. Lisa.
Thank you very much, Keisha. And I hope others from the Deaconess team will chime in, because I'm sure you have your own perspectives on how you would answer the question. So I would say that from a Power Moves perspective, that a commitment to embracing diversity, equity, and inclusion would need to be kind of a first step. So we actually have a readiness assessment at the back of the guide, which is 8 questions that you can ask to see, is it the right time for our grant making organization to use Power Moves and to explore this kind of process. So I would say that it would be a prerequisite. And it is true that Power Moves, for the most part, does focus on external relationships and strategies. But as that famous saying goes, culture eats strategy for lunch. So if your internal culture is not mirroring what you're aspiring to do externally, you probably won't succeed. So I think that, they're related to each other. As part of the Power Moves self-reflection process, inevitably you are going to come up against those issues internally, whether you choose to or not.
Thanks, Lisa.
Yeah, I would simply add that where we found the blind spots in the process, were in the areas where we were least reflective of the community. So take the first result on the need for us to be more intentional about including differently abled people. This may have something to do with the fact that we don't have on our team or on our board historically folks who reflect that particular challenge as deeply. And so we don't, this is an area where we need to do better. So I think there's this reality that you've got to reflect the change that you desire to see. And we do better externally because we have a more diverse team. We do better with community partners because we have a board that includes remarkably diverse perspectives across generations, geographies, and races. So that just kind of affirmed what Lisa's noting, but I'd also say one shouldn't wait to do the work externally until you get it together internally, because you'll never get it together. For us, it's been a journey of working to do both intentionally at the same time, and that just keeps some urgency with us.
Thank you, Starsky. We have another question, perhaps Starsky and Caroline can tag team this one. Was Power Moves the impetus that informed the Deaconess Foundation's decision to exclusively fund African-led nonprofits?
So we don't exclusively fund Black-led nonprofits. We are intentional about the lack of diversity in the sector, and we're informed by a significant amount of research by organizations like the Philanthropic Initiative for Racial Equity, the Association of Black Foundation Executives, and the Race to Lead report that suggests that although disproportionately we speak of African Americans being served by the social sector or being mobilized by the social sector, we have disproportionate access to leadership for African American CEOs, African American board chairs. We think that's something that needs to be corrected to get to the type of results that are desired. And so we don't exclusively fund Black-led organizations. We have had initiatives like the COVID-19 response, where we were seeing disparate impact in Black communities. So we're intentional to support Black-led organizations that were closer to that reality. So I hope that corrects the record. Caroline, there may be more to say there.
I don't think I have anything to add.
Thank you. I have a question. You guys will be pleased to see that we've gone international. We are a very large funder in the UK, and our income comes from either third-party relationships with government or the receipts of income from the National Lottery. This brings with it a responsibility around risk. What is your approach to risk, and have you found this has changed since your assessment? Starsky, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we talk about pretty consistently is that it is the responsibility of philanthropy to be the social venture capital for social change. We're a little concerned. Grantmakers for Effective Organizations had a report some time ago about the source codes of philanthropy, which we participated with as well. And one of the source codes of philanthropy is banking culture. We find that an unfortunate kind of bringing to bear in philanthropy because, quite frankly, we operate with a significant amount of freedom, at least in the U.S., with kindness to our UK questioner here. We operate with a significant amount of freedom from governmental oversight. We operate with the capacity to venture into things and to fund things that have not been proven. And quite frankly, because the government is the #1 funder in the social sector, we feel it's our responsibility to take more risk on things that perhaps have not been proven, which is one of the reasons why we take very seriously that second core recommendation about what we can do differently. Is that, evidence-based sounds nice for the sector, but quite frankly, innovation is much more our call on the continuum of funding in the US. And so we think that's important. We also have this unique posture as a health conversion foundation that is related to the church that gives us even more freedom from the kind of intangibles around accountability. So we feel that we have a greater responsibility to invest in things that have yet not been proven, even though we are quite intentional about things like our mission-related investments that are part of our investment portfolio with due diligence in that area.
Thanks, Starsky. I'll give you a moment to breathe and punt the next question to Lisa and Kia. How have you guys seen, in your perspectives, different foundations adapted the toolkit? Makia, perhaps within your examples from the field, or Lisa, certainly from launching the toolkit itself.
Well, I think that the Power Moves assessment is a real gift to the sector. So the questions that are embedded within the assessment across the 3 dimensions of building, sharing, and wielding power are really an invitation for foundations to scratch the surface and excavate and interrogate their practices. Some of the examples that I would lift up from the field is just that it's the invitation to foundations to actually start doing the self-reflective work of interrogating their practices and reconsidering what's possible as it relates to the power dynamic that is inherent within the relationship between a funder and a funding partner. I think the NCRP website has a whole host of examples, so I'm sure that Lisa can offer more color and context to how foundations are using the tool. But it's been really helpful in many other aspects of work where organizations are considering how to actually apply a more equitable approach to their interactions across the social sector.
Thank you, Makia. I added a link in the Q&A response to an issue of our Responsive Philanthropy Journal, which is available for free online. And we did showcase 3 foundations back in February who each use Power Moves in different ways. So I won't go into too much detail, but I will just echo what Makia said. It's a very flexible tool. It can be used a lot of different ways. And so, for example, a small family foundation was able to really dig in deep with their board and staff around just what do these concepts mean, and seeing where maybe the board thought, oh, we're much more forward with building power, and the staff saying, well, wait a minute, we don't see ourselves as being as forward as we could be. So with a smaller staffed foundation, it can be easy to kind of get into the real nitty gritty around where there may be lack of alignment between board and staff if the courage is there to have those conversations. There's been some large foundations that have literally just been kind of going department by department. So what does it mean to build, share, and wield power if you're in the communications department? What does it mean to do that if you're in the grants management department, for example? So there can be a lot of just translation work that can go on in a larger foundation where there's more specialized functions. You know, the feedback processes can be, you know, very extensive the way they were with Deaconess, or they can be more informal. Some foundations are already getting feedback and they don't want to kind of over survey and over interview their grant partners. So they try to really use that as a grounding to then do more internal exploration and internal reflection. So the guide is used in a lot of different ways, and it can be daunting if you read through the guide to think, oh my goodness, we can't do it all at once, or it's too much. But there's a lot of different pieces that can just be pulled out and applied if you're going through strategic planning, if you're going through some sort of evaluation process. Staff retreats, some foundations have been trying to figure out, like, how can we bring these concepts into our staff retreats just as a way to kind of be a touchstone and ground us in common language.
I'll just also add that the power of the questions is really expansive. And it's stating the obvious, but this project and engagement began in January. And we had a whole host of focus groups that were going to happen in person and be in community with each other. And then we had a pandemic. And so that pivoted and that shifted to one-on-one interviews with a number of stakeholders, which is different, but still very meaningful. And so the structure and format of the Power Moves assessment is, I think of it as a Rubik's Cube, where you can just keep contorting it to fit the needs of your foundation. And the questions that were chosen from the assessment were priority questions for each of the categories. So thinking about where Deaconess Foundation has had success already, but then where they're looking to lean in, and really prioritizing questions that would be most beneficial from the external partners that were able to offer their insights and reflection about their engagement and interactions with Deaconess Foundation.
Thank you, Makia. We have time for just one more question. We certainly want to honor our time together here with you guys. The question comes to, let's say, anyone who's willing to answer, really around the power dynamics of sharing existing power dynamics in the process of sharing power, right? What does that look like? How do funders, from the funding point of view, address obstacles and opportunities in addressing sharing power?
I would offer that I think it's critical to understand where that power and where that capital is actually derived from. And so there's almost a paradigm shift in thinking about the extraction of wealth that many philanthropies are able to utilize and benefit from that's actually not theirs to begin with. But I think that's a moment of reckoning, and it's important. I look forward to your comments, Starsky. I think it's a moment of reckoning, and that a number of foundations are really starting to sit with that. I think we see it now with the significant investments from, let's say, the Libra Foundation and organizations that are really investing in the movement for Black lives, et cetera, but that there's a shift when you think about the power not actually being yours, and that there being collective power and real partnership with the communities that you're actually supposed to be serving.
Yeah, since I got called out, I'll jump. It's important for us to remember that our missions, that there's nothing in our missions in most philanthropic organizations that can be accomplished if the dollars stay in the market, stay in the corpus. Our methods and our approaches may have something to do with those dollars and those investment approaches, but the mission is much wider and it's in community. So I'll just say very basically, before we began what many have come to call, perhaps unfortunately, a racial equity journey at Deaconess Foundation, when I came into the role 9 years ago, my predecessor had something, the late Jerry Paul would say to partners in community, you know, there's nothing this money can do if it doesn't get to you. And so it's important for us to remember, as in the interest of right setting, right sizing power dynamics, shifting power dynamics, is that there's not one foundation in the country that can get one thing done in its mission without grantee partners who are in community, who are closer to people. And so we would do well to invert the hierarchies of our logic models. We would do well to invert them to place the people on top, place the partners who are doing direct work with them, organizing them, shifting policy on their behalf next to them, and try to place ourselves as closely as possible to them, with ourselves beginning this picture at the margins rather than the center. And so I think that's, if we get that understanding of the power, that the power is with the people always, and that the funding only serves the hopes of the people, then we will put ourselves in check and perhaps keep ourselves in the right lane.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Starsky. I'll make a couple of notes before we transition. First and foremost, we thank each of our panelists for your candor and your thoughtful insights. And thank each of our attendees who asked questions during the course of our conversation this morning. You'll note that within the chat box, the final results and action plan result is now live on our website, and the link to that report is available to you. Additionally, you'll also note that we'll have the link to the evaluation of this morning's presentation. Before we close, we want to give you an opportunity to take a moment to share with us your thoughts about the presentation and the insights shared. And lastly, we want to make note that the video that was queued up from our friends from La Piana will also be made available in addition to the full report, the slides, the videos that will be shared will also be there as well. And now for a discussion of our next steps, please welcome the chair of Deaconess Foundation's board, Mr. Rudy Nickens.
Good morning. Again, I'm Rudy Nickens. I'm the board chair for the Deaconess Foundation Board of Trustees, and I am really happy that each of you joined us today. So we are near the end of our gathering. I want to thank you, the community, for engaging us in this discussion. Thank Keisha for hosting us, for leading this, facilitating this, planning this with this section, and of course, each of our panelists for their work. The Deaconess envisions a community that values the health and well-being of all children. It gives priority attention to the most vulnerable. Our community can only thrive when allocation of power, distribution of resources, benefits, opportunities, and burdens are not predictable by or predicated on race. This summer, the disparate impact of the novel coronavirus and racialized police killings of Black people across the country has called us into a period of reflection on our journey. It's called us to make institutional commitments to racial justice and to invite our community to aligned action. We are grateful that the assessment affirmed Deaconess's commitment to racial equity, and it aligns with the Foundation's mission and strategy to advance child well-being. We recognize that the best policies are lost, however, without the power to make the change. So we are eager to activate and operationalize recommendations where there are opportunities for growth as we strive to build equitably, share and wield power in our community. The recommendations and action plan are now available on the Deaconess website. They will guide how we continue to live out our commitment to fully leverage our resources in pursuit of equity and justice. In the days ahead, we will look to you, partners and community members, to hold us accountable as we aim to equitably assure greater conditions for child well-being in the St. Louis region. This journey to equity, justice, and child well-being will take all of us. It will necessarily include all of us. Please join us for the journey ahead. I want to remind you that what we want to do, what we intend to do, what our purpose is to model our institutional accountability to racial equity, to highlight our action plan, and to invite you into partnership to hold us accountable for how we're doing. As we close this day, we will close with an invitation from the NCRP, to our philanthropic and social sector partners to assess how well you are building, sharing, and wielding power for equity and justice. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I will turn it back to Keisha.
Power. Who has it? Who needs it? And how that has shaped our society has never been more evident than during this health crisis we are experiencing today. But as much as we're all adversely affected by the COVID-19 pandemic right now, there are those in our community who are suffering and sacrificing disproportionately. They are the people of color in our community. They are our community members with inadequate health care, others who may have lost access to the services they used to depend on. Still, they may be those in our community who've lost or are at risk of losing their jobs and homes, and others providing us with essential services on the front lines without having essential protections themselves. During this extraordinary time, we call on funders and donors to step up. You have the opportunity and the responsibility to exert the unique power at your disposal through the resources you have and the influence you wield in order to be part of the solution right now, post-crisis, and in the future. This month marks the second year since the National Committee for Responsive Philanthropy released Power Moves, our self-assessment toolkit for how to exercise power that centers equity and social justice. In the 2 years that we've used the guide to work with forward-thinking funders committed to breaking the mold on antiquated philanthropic practices, we've been encouraged to see that more and more funders in the sector are taking steps to apply an equity and social justice lens in their grant making and beyond. It has been especially heartening to see funders modeling these practices during this crisis because it shows us that it can be done. Grant makers all over the country are building power in their communities by supporting equitable, long-term, community-driven solutions like community organizing and advocacy. Community foundations all over the nation are stepping up by ensuring that the needs and solutions that exist in the community are at the forefront of their responses to the COVID-19 pandemic. Some, like the Boston Foundation, have been critical in bringing together their community resources to support their most vulnerable community members. To date, the Boston Foundation has increased giving from their donor-advised funds by 246% compared to this time last year. Meanwhile, other community foundations like the Seattle Foundation have tried to ease the burdens of those whose services are especially critical at this time, like immigrant rights groups, and going above and beyond by committing to supporting these organizations beyond the pandemic through to their recovery efforts. Grant makers are also sharing power with their grantees by responding to their needs on such requests as converting project grants into flexible general operating funds and committing to long-term support. Funders like the James Irvine Foundation have been applauded by their grantees for the proactiveness of their response, their commitment to long-term support, and the ease and flexibility with which they have deployed resources to grantees working on critical issues like workers' rights. Even in some areas that haven't been hit as hard yet by the pandemic, funders, many of them family foundations like the TLL Temple Foundation in rural East Texas, are ensuring that their grantees are prepared by preemptively offering flexible funding and reporting requirements and offering additional support where grantees need it. Finally, grant makers are stepping up beyond their grant making to wield their power by raising awareness, advocating for their communities, and using their influence to convene change makers. Funders like the Missouri Foundation for Health have been working with their local governments to ensure that their government's social and health infrastructures are able to sufficiently address the needs of the most vulnerable in their community. Others, like the Open Society Foundation, are supporting the grassroots and advocacy work of their grantees on the ground. They are directing an additional $130 million towards efforts to protect the rights of
Thank you for joining us. We appreciate your support. Please go to our website for the full report, as well as clicking on the link to complete the evaluation. Have a great rest of your day.